After I made the Grid 2019 video, link in the card in description, I wanted to revisit a few other Codemasters games, mainly the Grid and Dirt franchises, and I'm starting with Dirt 3, so in this video I'm going to give my thoughts on Dirt 3, and whether or not it's worth picking up, or revisiting, in the current year. This is the PC version for reference. Just before we get into it, I'd like to clarify that this is a single player, not multiplayer perspective, hence you won't find anything multiplayer focused in this video. That, and there's probably some things that I've missed. This isn't meant to be a really in-depth review, but rather how well does it hold up over 8 years. Also, if you can't start the game on your computer and have MSA Afterburner or Reaver Tuner running, you need to either stop it running or disable it for Dirt 3 in the Reaver Tuner settings, as the game wouldn't boot otherwise for me. Thanks to this user from 5 years ago for mentioning that. So let's start with the graphics. Here I'm very impressed with how well it's held up over the years. As the game is over 8 years old now, you might expect features like 5K support or 8x MSAA to not be baked into the main game. Yet here they are. Funnily enough, the visuals look surprisingly similar to Grid 2019, considering the age difference, although having a different, more gritty colour palette. Because of said age, I can max out the visuals at 4K, 120 FPS, and it's a fantastic experience. Or in other words, anyone with a PC in the last 10 years or so should be able to run it at 1080-60 just fine. Funnily enough though, I would rather run this game at 1440p than at 4K, as the anti-aliasing does a fantastic job with barely any performance impact, even on 8x. So I chose to record it at 1440p, but I'll upload it at 4K so there's less compression on YouTube side. I do find it interesting also that on my machine, I can play at high frame rates and use MSAA despite those being issues with Grid 2019 on the same machine. Then there's the gameplay. It's a driving game, so most of it is obvious, but one thing that I didn't get is the steering. For some reason, every car I've driven seems to heavily roll whenever I steer, as in it will rock to either side of the car. Hence, when I'm trying to ever so slightly steer to regain control of the car, I usually end up in a wall or spun out, if that makes sense. Like using a keyboard instead of a controller. Other than that, I find the physics to be pretty good for an arcade style game. You can tweak the car for each surface. For example, making the suspension higher or lower, the gear ratio higher or lower, the diff tighter or looser, etc. Which can give you an extra edge depending if the aim is raw speed or cornering ability. The type of cars you can have is good enough for me. There's a truck, smaller ones, not the transporting type, 4-wheel drive rally cars, drifting cars, I don't know what you call them, 2-wheel drive rally cars, and more, I think. There's enough variety in both the stages and race types so that you have an excuse to use each type of car, rather than just picking one for aesthetics. The main downside is similar to Grid 2019, where there's only a limited choice of cars, think about 8 max, and the only difference being horsepower and weight most of the time. A few times there's literally no performance difference between like 6 cars, so I just chose the one that looked coolest, but there really should have been some kind of upgrade path, as what's the point of different cars otherwise? At least you don't have to buy said cars, they're just given to you. Now onto the tracks. There's quite a few more track variants than I expected. When I first played the game, I thought this was just a rally game, which really confused me as Dirt Rally was released a few years later. But after playing the different track types, they helped me to keep engaged, because it's not all the same. The game switches them up frequently. There's the aforementioned Rally, Rally Cross, which is the standard X amount of laps with 7 or so other cars. Land Rush is basically the same thing. Drifting, which is pretty self-explanatory. Head to Head is usually at the end of a season, and yeah, I don't know how to say that. But it's basically get the highest score possible by performing stunts. For example, drifting, crashing, driving over ramps, etc. Each race seems to last about 2 minutes, which, although I get it's an arcade type game, this was frustratingly small in quite a few of the rallycross stages mainly, as there was barely any time to overtake. And you have 2 rewinds you can use, I believe. This was at normal difficulty for me, so although I'm terrible at games, even I cannot play at the easiest setting. You also get bonus points at the end of a season for not using rewinds and drifting, etc. Now into a bit more detail. Rally first. Now, unlike the coincidentally named Dirt Rally and Dirt Rally 2.0, it's a lot more arcade-like, as you'd imagine, and is a bit more forgiving when something goes wrong. The reset only takes about 2 seconds, at least on normal difficulty, and because each rally stage seems to only last less than 2 minutes, it's pretty easy to learn the track. Then there's Rallycross and Land Rush. The reason I put both together is there's not much difference between them, to me. They're both much closer to standard driving games, as they have multiple laps and NPCs you need to overtake, just obviously not on tarmac. Rallycross has different types of terrain in one track, more on that later, whilst Land Rush is the same terrain, but even I can't feel any real difference when racing, so they might as well be the same thing. Then there's drifting. This was really confusing to me the first time, as I thought it was a rally stage. I was so focused on getting to the end quickly, I didn't even realise the huge points meter in the corner. So this mode you have to rack up as many points as possible by, you guessed it, drifting. This was a surprise challenge for me, as the platinum medal means that you need to drift at least decently in every single corner. But it's a nice change of pace for me, as having the extra challenge again keeps me playing longer. Next, head to head. This, as mentioned before, is only done at the end of a season, in the campaign anyway. So 4 winners enter a final, as it were, and the driver who wins twice wins the season. Each race is done with 2 drivers, yourself and an NPC. You both drive a Land Rush style track, but either alongside each other, meaning you can't ram or otherwise sabotage them, or in opposite directions to make it more exciting for the audience. It's a really interesting concept that makes the stakes even higher. Whoever has the best time wins the race. Finally, there's that, where you need to get as close to the highest score as you can whilst beating the other predefined opponent's scores. Not the most exciting mode, but still enjoyable in small bursts. Now for the variety of stage terrain. There's the classic tarmac / road, then there's snow, which is surprisingly close to tarmac, a bit slippier but not too far off. Next, dirt and mud, as you'd imagine from the namesake. It's yet harder to control, as it's easy to spin out or crash, and rallycross being a mix of all 3. There's not much need to go further into detail, because, as mentioned before, there's not a huge difference between them, personally speaking. Finally, I'll talk about the UI. I really like how animated and lively it is. For this type of game that is very arcade focused, it really adds to the tone of the game, with these triangle parts flying around and animations for every screen. You even get to see your car driving around, just in case you forgot it was a racing game. I also really like the replay feature after races, as it's a much more exciting way to watch back a gameplay session than just recording yourself from one position. My verdict then? Overall, I'd say if you can find the game for about £6 or $8, then it's definitely worth playing for a good few hours, either in the campaign or just in the level select. That's assuming you can find a key, as it was delisted on Steam in 2017. Any more than that, and the arcade nature may not give you your money's worth. Or, if you're thinking of playing it again, after however long, then I'd say you may be surprised at how well it's aged, at least on PC. Not sure how well the console versions hold up, and because of its age, along with the high resolution and frame rate support, the experience may be almost brand new like it was to me. So that's the video. It's a bit longer than I initially expected, but I did want this to be quite detailed, as I felt this game deserved it. If you like the video, go donate to charity. I can't remember if I've used that one before. See ya.